All right, guys, I think we're live. My wife's been telling me there's a little bit of a lag, but so I'll do this for a second and then I'll start. I'm so happy to finally have him here. What a wonderful day it is to have Stephen Aryan on the channel. How are you today, Stephen?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks for having me here tonight, Matt.
I absolutely. I have just recently, in the last few months, started watching your channel. I've known about you as an author longer than I knew that you did a YouTube channel.
Yeah.
And you've got one of those voices. I keep telling my wife, I said, I really like his voice. He's got a good voice.
Thanks.
And yeah, of course. And so it's not only entertaining, it's wonderful stuff that we both have in common. I told you a little bit beforehand, you're one of the first people that gave me kind of the courage to reach out to somebody I look up to, Christopher Rocchio, and loving his book, Empire of Silence, by the way. It's wonderful.
Such a good series. Man, I could talk about that for hours, and I did with him. And I'm like, I've got to let you go because otherwise I'm going to keep you here all day.
Yeah.
I've got Demon in White to read next. I'm going to get some more books in the series for Christmas. I can't wait to keep going with this series. It's just phenomenal.
It's vast. Like from the very first couple words, you're like, okay, this is going to be huge.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's going to be big. It's going to be big.
Absolutely. So I would love to have you speak on the series that you've written in. If I hope I'm right, there's two main series that you've written in.
Yeah, and this new one's my third series, really. Yeah.
I would love to hear kind of a little bit about each and what you're writing in currently.
Yeah, sure. So my debut novel, Battle Mage, came out in 2015, so it's like 8 years now, and that was the first in an epic fantasy trilogy. And I kind of broke some of the rules in that I didn't want to make it one complete story and it all just kind of follows on. I changed genres kind of within the trilogy, and I had characters move into the foreground and the background. So the first book, Battle Mage, is very much it's kind of everything. It's thrown against the wall. It's a big war book. And what happens is essentially a first world war within this fantasy world, and there's frontline mages and there's non-human races and there's spies and there's all sorts of stuff. And I kind of gone very big. So on the second book, it's like, well, I can't go any bigger than a world war. So what do I do? But I'd planned this ahead. So the second book is really small. It's more like a police procedural or a crime story, but still within a fantasy world. There's a serial killer, there's crime families from some like The Sopranos. There's the cops trying to hunt them down, trying to work out what's going on and stop the city tearing it apart. There's spies. And then the third book, Chaos Mage, is kind of like a post-apocalyptic horror. It's set in a city on the edge of the world, like The Walking Dead, that's been decimated by this war. And the dead keep coming back to life, kind of. And there's monsters in the shadows, and there's weird stuff. And there's still mages in it and other characters that we've seen in the first two books. So I did that, and some people loved it. Some people were like, every book is totally different. Every book has got its own feel, but then he ties things up together. And some people are like, it's not one story. I don't like it. It doesn't kind of follow on. And I'm like, well, you can't please everybody.
That's so true, right?
It just, you don't even try it because you can't do it. You just can't do it. So then the second trilogy followed on from that. It's like 10 years after after Chaos Mage. The second trilogy picks up, set within the same world. And this time I did one big story, and I still got the same complaints. Hey, man, this is all like one big story. It's not broken. So, the
opposite kind of thing.
Yeah. And I'm like, oh, God damn it. Anyway, so it was more mages. It was a different kind of story. It was dealing with the aftermath of the war, how people feel about magic when they're a dying breed, mages. And it's about paranoia. It's about magic isn't passed on through families. It's not through bloodlines. It's kind of random how people end up having the spark within this world. And so some people are trying to get rid of all magic. And it's like, not quite the witches' trials, but some of that where they're like trying to kill kids who show the spark. And so if they get rid of them, then they wouldn't have any more kids that have it. But that's not how it works. And there's paranoia. So I did all of that. And there's a lot of magic. There's a lot of 6 books about magic. I'm like, okay, enough with the mages.
So that's the first time I've dipped into a little bit of the blurb, but having you explain that to me, man, that sounds very cool. So I'm sorry for interrupting you.
Go ahead, please do. No, it's fine. So those are six books. I did a prequel novella before that. What I haven't mentioned in these 6 books is like there are gods walking around as people, like all the time, every day, and you meet them throughout the book too. So there's like in all of the books, there's people wandering around, and you're like, who's that? And then we kind of find out more as stuff goes on. And so this was a big series with a lot of different things in and lots of ideas. And, you know, after 6 books with heavy magic, I wanted to do something different.
Softer.
Yeah, something very, very different, a different move, kind of pivot. So I did a duology, which is just over this shoulder. There, the coward, and then the warrior. I'm doing the mirroring. I can't do the mirroring.
It's so hard, people.
Like,
it's very hard.
Yeah. So I did something completely different there. I wanted to use the trope of the fantasy quest. You know, the kind of farm boy goes on a quest and becomes a hero. I love
it.
But I wanted to do a modern twist, and I wanted to change it, and I wanted to kind of play around with lots of different ideas. So the coward is about a young guy who 10 years before the book starts, he did that. He was, you know, like in you've seen the film The 13th Warrior?
I have.
Okay, so you know he's a totally ordinary guy, and he gets dragged along with these bunch of maniacs who are all sword-wielding experts, and he's there like, hello?
Right, exactly. And so you can relate with that a little bit, because we've all been there.
Because you're just this guy. So he was 8, so he's just a teenager, and all the heroes are gathering together for this massive quest. The king's going to send them north to find out what's going on. And he's a teenager. He's like, I want to go. This is going to be amazing. I'm going to become a hero. I'm going to become rich and famous like them. And he doesn't, he follows them. They don't want him there. They try to discourage him from going. He keeps following them. And eventually they say, all right, you can come with us. He goes on this epic quest. Everybody dies apart from him. The evil's defeated and he comes home. But he's completely broken by his experiences. He's just got PTSD. He can't, for the first couple of years, he barely functions as a human. And he spent out the last 10 years living on his farm, staying away from people, doesn't want to talk to anybody, and just trying to come to terms with what happened. But in the meantime, the world has moved on. They talk about heroes. They talk about the songs. Everyone has there's like the big kind of epic saga that they tell about this great adventure that he went on. People are constantly asking him, tell me about this great adventure. And he just wants to forget it. And so the coward starts where the weather's turning cold again. There's something going wrong in the 5 kingdoms. The king's like, you did it last time. Why don't you go and do it again? That'd be a great idea. And he's like, I really don't want to. But, you know, so it's about heroism. It's about cowardice. It's about celebrities. It's about how we view people and put them on a pedestal. It's about propaganda versus the truth, because there's the song that everyone sings about is great adventure, and then there's the truth of what actually happened. Like, no one wants to hear that the great heroes on the second day ate some bad meat and got run of the shits for 5 days. No one wants that in the song, but everyone's like, oh, and the great heroes, dad. And he's like, yeah, but they whined and complained.
That's
and they
the best analogy I've ever heard in my life.
You know what I mean? So
that was great.
So it's all about that. It's about a guy coming to terms with his past. It's about PTSD. It's how you deal with it. The fact that he is completely broken, and he gathers some new heroes together, and they go on this great adventure. So I'm playing around with the trope, a lot.
So there's 2 things really quick.
Go for it.
A coward is something that I didn't know that I really liked in a book, because it's so human, because we all think that at one point in our lives before we take on this, whether it's having kids or getting married or writing a book or starting a YouTube channel, you're like, I just don't think I can do this. I don't have what it takes. I don't and then you compare yourself to other things, right? It's like, I don't have what this person has, and I want that trait, and I don't have and so you see the overcoming of obstacles, and that's such a human thing. The one that I just read was We Are the Dead.
Mike Shackle.
Oh man, Tinstra, Tinstra, you know, she's like, look, I know my father is this big war general, but I have nothing in common with him. And she like kind of quits everything, but then she's forced to go on and do things that she never thought she could. So that's where it started. So what I'm hearing is amazing. And then you talk about like kind of the coming of age, or like a farm boy that is maybe a little bit of a reluctant hero, or finds out he has these special powers, and nothing makes me feel cozier. And then like if they hit an inn and a tavern on the way, you know, drink some mead, then it's even better. They
do the kind of like meeting other people, putting out the word, trying to gather more heroes, but all the old ones that he traveled, they're all dead. So it's like, who steps forward now? Who are the new heroes that travel with him, and what are they like? And they're not what he's expecting. And so there's a lot of there's the great surface story of someone going and having a great adventure. Then there's a whole lot of stuff underneath that's kind of all about, broken people and family and found family and dealing with past tragedies and coping with things. So yeah, there's a few layers in the book.
So that's the Coward. That's the name of the duology.
That's the first book, and then the second book is The Warrior.
The Warrior.
Same characters, same world. A few years later, and the shortest pitch I have for this is The Wizard of Oz in the Upside Down.
Oh man, dude, Wizard of Oz! You hit me in my like nostalgia there. Grow up, my mom was just like a freak about it, and then naturally I became a freak over it. And I've never heard. I've only been in this game, if you will, the fantasy reading game, for like 4 or 5 years now. Yeah. So a lot of things are continuing to come to me new, and I love that.
That's great.
And being compared to the Wizard of Oz, man, I can't wait to start reading your books. So talk about the series with the Judas Blossom.
Yeah, so this is my brand new series. I've pivoted again and done something completely different. I get bored really easily. Like, I don't
things refreshing.
I never want to write the same thing twice, because so some of my favorite authors have done like 30, 40, 50 books over, decades. And sometimes you read a book and you go, you've already done this before. Like, better. And I'm like, oh man. So I'm constantly pushing myself. So the Judas Blossom is historic fantasy. So it's set within our world. There's a little bit of magic, but not a lot. And it's a mix of real events with me dancing between the raindrops. There's real characters from history, and then there's fictional characters as well. And it's all kind of mashed together and scrambled up and stretched out and changed into hopefully a cohesive story. And it's set in 13th century Persia. So
wow.
So 1260, so 1260, the story starts. And at this time in the world, the Mongol Empire was vast. It was the largest kind of contiguous land empire in the world at that time. And in 1260, it was 80 years after Genghis Khan. So these are his grandsons that are now ruling the empire. And they're trying to still conquer the world. So you've got some of them pushing into China. Some of them are going down towards India. Some are going towards Europe. Some are going towards Africa. And our story focuses on one of these 4 areas, where a bit like Mike's story in a way, where the Mongols have already fought the army and won. They've won, they've conquered it. There's no army for them to fight, but there are still rebels, and they're kind of trying to take it down from the inside. Like, how do you fight someone without an army? How do you get in their head? How do you take them apart? And it was only after I wrote it and started talking about it, I thought, a giant empire and a group of rebels. What does that remind me of? 1977. Yeah, I was born that year. Gee, what came out that year?
Right. Well, for anybody that doesn't know what you're talking about,
Star Wars.
Yeah. So I am a huge fan of the first 3 movies. I have so hard tried. Wow, that sounded really bad. I've tried with all of my might to continue and kind of check out what Disney has done. And I'm not a huge fan, but I love the first trilogy.
Yes. Original films, absolutely. Yeah. I like some of the extended stuff, but not all of it. But yeah, so I didn't realize until after I'd written the book that, there's parallels between Star Wars and the story.
They took something that was very broad and made it very unique. So I think that a lot of books could be like, what, that sounds like, I went, before I started talking to authors, I was like trying to, as a writer, because that's what I want to do. And I said, what better way to get a following and then learn is to talk to the people who have done it. And I'm sitting here before I started my YouTube channel with this unrealistic goal of what is that one original idea? There are none, guys. There's probably people who would maybe disagree with me. What is your personal opinion on that?
I don't think so. there's two schools of thought. One is that they say there's something like there's only 5 or 7 stories, like core concepts, and it's how you tell that story that's the thing.
That would be the boat I'd be in.
Yeah, I believe that's probably true, but every story, if you boil it down far enough, will fall into some kind of system or trope. But as ever, we've been telling stories for thousands of years. And we're still doing it now, and we're still coming up with what feel like new stories. So I think you're not looking for the original idea that's going to change the world. You're going to find the idea that speaks to you, that you're most passionate about in that moment, that you want to get out there in the world.
I love that.
Well, so here's an example. So Dean Koontz, who I've been reading for like 30 years, he used to do this. I don't know if he does it anymore, but he writes by the seat of his pants. He doesn't kind of plan his books. But what he does is he'll come up with like ideas, just little bits and pieces, and he'll get like a post-it note or an index card, and he'll write down a couple of lines. You know, like man finds a note on his windshield. It says, if you go here, this person will die. If you don't go here, this other person will die. And, oh, that's an interesting hook. And he'll put it in his drawer. And he'll come up with a bunch of these and put them in his drawer. And when he's finished one book, he'll get the list of cards out of the drawer and he'll go through them and be like, right, which one of these is speaking to me the most right now that I have to write? All these ideas that you kind of have ticking over you in your head. The grass is always greener when you write a book. Something else pops in your mind and goes, you could be writing this. This is amazing. And it's a trick. So you write them all down. And he does this and he'd be like, right, that one that's speaking to me now. He sits down and he starts writing that book and off he goes. And that's how I kind of work in a way. I'm constantly coming up with things and I'll scribble them down. And once I'm finished a book, I don't just do little cards. I do like tons of notes. I'll then go through my ideas and go, right, which is really kind of calling to me now, which won't leave me alone. What am I dreaming about? And I start writing that book next, usually. So
you just drilled into the rich deposit that I'm trying to find as far as this channel, man.
This is how you do it, man. This is how you do it. Yeah,
I love that.
What speaks to you the most? Like some people want to do revenge stories. Some people want to write huge, fantastical dragons and all sorts of cool battles. Some want to do a spy story. Whatever it is, fantasy is the ultimate cheat code. You can tell any kind of story you want within the genre, anything. And I've proven that with my books already. You have certain things to include. You don't have it in our world. You still could have it in our world if you do urban fantasy. Mm-hmm. Whatever kind of story you want to do, fantasy, I think, is a fantastic genre.
I've got my wife on the hook as far as fantasy. She loved, she's listening, actually. I'm going to shout you guys out here in a minute. H.C. Newell's The Curse of the Fallen. And loves it. She's on the second book now. But I think she's really going to dive head first into an urban fantasy. So where would your recommendations for her be? Okay, so you could start with some of the shorter series. There are some that are massive. Like I read Jim Butcher's Dresden Files. He's currently on book 17 out of 23. That's the only one I knew to reference to my wife. Yeah, you could try. So there's a short series that I really like by Mike Carey, who's written the Felix Castor urban fantasy novels. There's 5 of them, and they're set in London, and they're really, really good, really dark as well. What else is there? Steve McHugh, who's a friend of mine, he writes some fantastic urban fantasy books. So one real quick, because I'm a slow writer. You said Mike Castle, and what was the next? Mike Carey is Carey. Sorry, yeah, Carey, and then Steve McHugh, Mchuch. Thank you for that. So those are 2 good ones. If you want a fun one that's a little bit more lighthearted, I try Ben Aronovich, Arovinch. It's where, so his pitch was, imagine if Harry Potter grew up and then joined the police force. Oh, wow. So you got this black guy in London who joins the Met, the Metropolitan Police, as a normal officer. And then he's sent off to go and work with this guy that is a bit of a weird officer. And he's like, well, why am I with him? What's going on? And you find out that this one guy is the only official wizard in the police force. And this young constable who's been sent off, he's got a little bit of a spark. And Nightingale, his boss, is like, yeah, that's why you're working with me. Nice. And then you start to reveal layers of London. There are things
around the edges of London that most people don't know about. And
Stephen, I think you and I are very much on the same wavelength with our story loving. I love an adventure, one that when you you realize the adventure that is going to be laid before you, you get this feeling in your stomach. You're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna have to hibernate with this book for a while. You know?
Yeah.
So just to shout out some viewers, I love all these guys. E.L. Montague, he's always here for me. He's a good writing buddy, does my Discord. Bert Strubble, he's always here as well. Thank you, Bert. Up in New York where it's really cold. It's cold in Ohio. And you're in the UK, right?
Yeah. It's not too bad here. It's just rainy here today, but we had cold and snow yesterday. So
it's getting there, right? He also says this book is I'm assuming he's talking about the Judas Blossom. I agree with you even more so now. That's why I love to start my books after I talk with an author, because it just makes that experience. Have you done that with people you've talked with, or do you usually read before?
I try to, but sometimes there's just too many, so I haven't had a chance to read them. So I'm going to talk to Zach Argyle soon. I haven't read his book. I've got the first one here.
Yeah,
I go Voice of War to read. I've got it.
Wonderful book.
There you go. I've got it. I know Zach. I met him when he came to the UK to an event, and I was like, after that, after talking to him, like, I've really got to read his book. So I picked it up, but I haven't read it yet.
It's an adventure. I think you'll like it, Stephen. But I didn't read it until after I talked with Argyle on my channel. Okay, so it was kind of the still thing. So HC Noah, she says, hola, she's driving home, be listening to us. Thank you. Were you? Oh, what is it? Oh yeah. HC, my sister lives in the same area in Tennessee as you, and we know you guys just got hit with some wicked tornadoes. So I hope everything.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like
stay safe, everyone. Yeah,
absolutely. It's pretty horrendous pictures, man. Matthew Doyle, konnichiwa.
Konnichiwa, Matthew.
Matt on books. I'm so glad that I usually do these at 9 Eastern, so it's a little late for you guys in the UK. He's in the UK. I love that though. When I do an earlier one, I get my other crowd and that I don't get to usually talk with. I love that.
Yeah.
Corey's here. Can't comment. I'm driving. Please don't. Yeah.
We'll keep talking, Corey. You just keep driving. That's all right.
Absolutely. Man. So
don't
free
worry.
wolf.
Don't worry.
He's a writer as well, always here. Langdon Franz. His book's all the way over there, but I'm super excited to read it. He's another indie author. Let's see over here. John A. Douglas. I have some content that I'm filming that involves something you sent me. So yeah, he's always here as well. Timothy Wolf, another wonderful indie author. Thank you, brother, for being here. And a question. Stephen, what is your favorite book / series? The ultimate question.
Oh,
you had to do it.
That's just torture. Oh God. I don't know. I have so many favorites. This is it. It's like pick your favorite child. You can't do it.
Right. So I stopped asking that question because when I started, I was very rookie in this. That's a very hard question. And I don't know if anybody truly has. I mean, I'm sure somebody has that one book that they would choose to put on their deathbed with them. But
my answers change all the time. Like if you said,
so give a few.
So if you said, what's my favorite science fiction book of all time? That's easy. It's Dune by Frank Herbert.
Okay.
And when people started saying that Christopher Rocchio's book will like that, I'm like, that is a high bar. Okay, let's go in. And you know what? Yeah. It's amazing. So
they have similarities then.
Yeah.
Okay. In a wonderful way, I guess.
Oh yeah.
I haven't read Dune.
Okay, so you started reading Empire of Silence.
I'm like 25% through. Yep.
So Christopher always describes it as science fantasy. It has that slightly Star Wars feel in that there's something else. You know, Star Wars, there's a force, there's a mystical element, there's something that's not just pure science. And Dune has that too. And in book 2, which I've just read of Christopher Rocchio's, there's more of the science fantasy aspect. It's coming in and I can see it now and think about it. I'm like, okay. And now I can see the greater parallel. So you would like Dune, I think.
I think so as well.
But there's a contentious thing of like, I say only read the first 3 books. Some people say, oh, 4 is amazing. And I'm like, I did not enjoy 4.
I've heard that. I've heard that.
Or 6. You know. But other series that I love, Oh, I love The Expanse, which is just above me. Oh, there it is. And
S.A. Crosby?
yeah. James S.A. Corey, and the TV show was fantastic. That was just so good.
Really? Okay.
Oh yeah. It's Amazon. So they did 5 series on Amazon, but it only goes up to like the 5th or 6th book.
Which one should I do first?
So what I was doing was like watching a series and then reading a book, and then watching the next series and then reading a book, because you always get more from the book, and it's not exactly one for one, but it kind of works really well.
I got my first taste of that this year with The Wheel of Time. I absolutely, and I know probably a lot of people disagree. I don't care. I loved the show, and I loved its comparisons. Dude, Egwene is way more badass than where I've read in the book. I know she gets better. I've only like book 4.
Well, I was reading them when they were first coming out, so the wait we had between books was tough, and you have to we'd go back and reread them again. And I stopped reading the series. I don't even know what book, like 9 or 10, and it was a few years later that, of course, he died, and then Sanderson finished the series. So I haven't finished the whole series, but I've read a bunch of the books, and I am enjoying the TV series with some caveats. There's some things I'm like, okay, but I also appreciate that it's an adaptation, and I appreciate that it's 14 books. And Amazon, the days of 22 episodes a season are gone. Nobody's doing that anymore. They are done and dusted. Amazon has 8 to 10 hours for a season, and that's like a book and a half. They're not going to do 14 seasons. Anybody who thinks that is mad. You might get 7 if you're lucky.
Maybe thought 8. About that. I said, what are they going to do? Because it's like you said, I've only read to book 4. But do you get to a point and make up an ending and end the series that kind of way, or what?
They're gonna have to cut a whole bunch of stuff. So they tried to do that with Game of Thrones, but obviously he hasn't finished the series, so they kind of made up some stuff themselves and they tied some things off. They did it well. Other things they didn't do well in the last season. Because there's so much content, and you might have maximum 80 hours for the Wheel of Time, maybe 100 if they're lucky. They're going to have to just cut storylines out. I mean, there's a minor plot line in Game of Thrones where, I won't say who, those who haven't read the book, a character dies and is then brought back. In the TV show, she dies and that is it. You don't see anything about her at all. All of her stories, it's not a huge story, but all of the ripples that she had, they just don't touch them, or they give it to someone else. And with the Wheel of Time, you've got 14 books at like 700-800 pages a pop. You can't do it on TV. No way. I never
thought about that as far as hours to hours ratio. That's a good way to put it down and think about it, because anybody who listens to an audiobook, that's a pretty good amount of estimated time that somebody, maybe a little faster, that you know, but of course you can speed it up if you want with that. But so let's say it takes The Eye of Time, what would you say, 14 hours maybe to get through?
Like
that. And then kind of trying to squeeze that into
8 hours of TV.
Yeah. And there's so much more visually, I think, that you're trying to digest, rather than you're able to kind of make it up yourself when you're reading. So I have a lot of respect to anybody that's like, I'm going to tackle this adaptation, period.
Yeah, it's an amazing achievement to do it and to actually get it onto TV, because a lot of stuff is optioned. A huge amount of things are optioned, and they never actually get made. I had some people asking about some of my books. I got really excited and spoke to my agent, and she just goes like, "Don't get excited." I'm like, "Why?" And she said, "Because they buy up a lot of stuff for the option, and nothing ever happens with it. But because the cost for them is relatively small." So like an episode of TV, it doesn't, but let's say it costs $1 million. It costs a lot more per episode of TV. If they wanted to option my Battle Mage books, they might give me, I don't know, $10,000, $20,000 for 2 years. So that means within that window, if they make something, then you'd get more money on top, depending on what it was made. If they don't do anything with that within those 2 years, the books rights revert back to me, and then someone else would have to buy them. But if it costs $20,000, say, even if it was $50,000 versus $1 million for one episode of TV, imagine how many rights they can just hoard like that and sit with their arms around.
You've touched on a few things already that I've never really thought of, and I think that's so cool that your experience personally is speaking. That's yeah, I never thought that's really cool though. I would be super giddy. I think that you should be excited with the
Oh God, yeah.
realization,
I mean,
with like the realistic part of it.
for it to happen, it would be fantastic. So a friend of mine, Pete McLean, his
Mhm.
novels were optioned, and then I think COVID basically hit. And when I asked him a while ago, he's like, "You know as much as me. Nobody knows what's going to happen, if anything will happen." Um, you know,
That happens in a boardroom.
Joe Abercrombie must have had his books optioned time after time after time, I would guess. And we're only just getting something now, like 10 years
Hopefully,
on.
right? I don't know the latest update. Have you heard? I know they're going to be doing it for
Best Served Cold as a
Best Served
film.
Cold.
I will believe it's made when it comes out at the cinema. Until then, like everything else, I don't believe it. They can make it and not show it like they did with Batgirl. They're like, yeah, we'll write it off. And so when it turns up in the cinema, I will celebrate and raise a glass to Joe. But until then, man, I am just not. I would take the money. I would smile. I'd be delighted. I'd be like, oh, yeah, great. Thank you. You've optioned my books. That's amazing. When it happens, yeah, then I'll get excited.
Then I'll dance a little bit, do like a little jig, you know?
But yeah, because like when Game of Thrones came out, you know, they went out and just scooped up a whole bunch of rights for other stuff. They just kind of went like that so that then nobody else could make it. And if they want to, they have the possibility then for the fraction of a cost. So
that makes sense to do as a big business. Also, at the same time, there's another side, which is the side that you're speaking on. And yeah, man, I think it's both exciting and I mean, you've written to a point where somebody's like, hey, if you know, it ends up in a part where I want to make this a show or a TV show or series or a movie. Man, just that's so special, dude. I think that is wonderful.
It would be amazing to see it. Yeah, I'd love to see some of my friends' work put on the screen. That would be so good.
Book Mama 87, that may be my other half. Yeah, she says, thank you for the Rex. That's a couple of new ones I haven't heard.
You're welcome.
And Tim says the show's amazing, but he also says I still didn't like season. I agree, Tim. The season 1 finale of The Wheel of Time, but they absolutely redeemed it with the second. Man, they knocked it out of the park with the second, in my opinion.
It was good. The end of the second season was really good. Yeah.
So, I probably missed it, but just in case anybody else did too, the subgenre that you would put for the Judas Blossom.
I'd say it was historic fantasy.
That's
really.
Right, historic.
Fantasy. Yeah. So it's a trilogy. Book 1 is obviously out. Book 2, I've just done a really heavy edit on book 2 and handed that back to my editor the other day, and I've got 2 chapters left to write on the first draft of book 3.
Wow.
So you're
a productive guy.
Well, I'm not as productive as like Adrian Tchaikovsky. That man's a machine. But
I mean, his very first series is what, 10 books?
10 books. 10 books.
The Shadows of the Apt. I just dipped into book 1, which is, dude, that's a unique voice. I have to say that, like what you were touching on earlier, which I loved. It's like, take these stories, but make them unique because you're telling it.
Yeah. He obviously loves insects and all that kind of stuff. And you're like, a fantasy book. Yeah, okay, great. And these different races, sure. And then one's an ant kingdom. And you're like, what? And
yeah,
it's genius, the stuff he does. It's just so clever. The guy's brilliant, really.
The first book I read of his was Children of Time. And, you know, so for me, not knowing much about his past writing, spiders, just an insect guy, man. He is. And then I dip into the Shadow of the Apt. I said, this guy likes bugs, bro.
He really does, man. Yeah. It's so good. It's so
but
good.
It's wonderful. Yeah. And not only does he like this, the insect world, what is it, entomology?
Yeah.
He knows his stuff. Like he is very, very well researched. He's well read. He knows what he's talking about, and he puts that realisticness or that realism into the way that he writes, and you could tell that research and love for what he's talking about is there.
This is it. Yeah, passion, and he writes about it, and it comes through in his work. So
it's wonderful. So where did you get the inspiration? Let's see, for the Judas Blossom, that series.
Yeah, I like history. I'd studied and done some research and just reading on the Mongol Empire. It kind of fascinated me. I have a connection to the Middle East because my dad is from there. I'd watched a bunch of stuff. Like Netflix has done a TV series called Marco Polo about a part of the life of Marco Polo.
Very good.
And it's set in the same era as my story, essentially. So it's around pretty much the same time, except he's over in the court of Kublai Khan. And my story focuses on one of Kublai's brothers, who's looking after one of the other areas, essentially, of the empire. So, it all just kind of like gelled together. I'd been reading about it. I kept finding gaps. So one of the characters in the book is she's called Princess Kokochin, and she's the last of her tribe. And this is all part of history. In the book of the Travels of Marco Polo, what happened was Kublai says, right, you're going to take the princess and you're going to go all the way over to Persia, and she's going to marry the Khan there, and she's going to be his latest wife. So Marco travels 2 years across the world to take this woman to this place to marry this guy. And by the time she gets there, the guy she was going to marry is dead. His son is now the Khan, so she marries him instead. And then, according to history, 3 years later, she was dead. And so, like, she's just a big question mark in history. Like, well, what happened? What was going on? Why did she go there? What was her journey like across the world? You know, what did she experience traveling so far, coming to a strange country, knowing nobody, being dropped in the middle of this place, being the one wife of many for this guy who's like, not to be crude, but, you know, she's a new toy. And after a while, you kind of get bored because he's got 20 others and a bunch of concubines and stuff. So she was quite an interesting character to be like, well, what's she going to do in this whole totally different world and different country? And how's she going to react? And so she became one of the main characters of the story.
That question mark in your head sparked so many good questions that you knew you had to write about it.
This is it. It's what was bugging me, what was itching at the back of my brain. Like, I can't, it's like that thing in the Matrix. And he says, it's like a splinter in your mind. You just can't scratch it. And it's just bugging you.
That's like one of those visceral lines that you're just like, ooh, that hurts to think about.
There's a splinter in your mind. Yeah.
But it makes so much sense. You get those burning desires or those passions, and I love that, to hear about people that write about those. That's so amazing. That's what I want to do.
Yeah. Do you have ideas?
Yes, I have lots of ideas. My issue at the moment, and actually, my wife gave me an early Christmas present that I think is going to help, because she knew that I was kind of trying to tackle this, and it's the outline. I'm not a pantser. I've tried. It goes nowhere and then everywhere at the same time.
Yeah, don't. If it's not for you, it's not for you, and you know, just don't force it.
Yeah. And so I found that out. So I'm progressing. I know that I'm not a pantser. So actually, you may have heard of it. I haven't really dipped into it yet, but it's by Tanja Haneke, and it is, my green screen is going to mess it up.
You see,
but,
Writer's Workbook.
The Writer's Notebook. So I can't wait to. I think once I have my ideas and my characters and my plot points on paper, I can feel it. If I know where I'm going, I've gotten feedback, and I think that I can do it well. Yeah. So I just can't wait to be at that point.
I plan my books too as well. So if I have the seed of the idea rattling around in my head, I'll write down some notes. I'll keep adding to the World Bible and sketching things out. But when I'm getting ready to write it, I'll create a framework or a skeleton. So I know the beginning, the middle, the end. And then I set up a bunch of like milestones of things I need to reach. And I kind of plan them out, and not necessarily down to the last chapter, but I kind of, road marks. And I leave a bit of wiggle room between things, because even though I'm a planner, I have to have some creativity in the writing process, because I've planned everything to the nth degree, that when I write it, it'll be boring, and I'll think it'll feel boring because I'm just kind of like joining the dots. It's just so tedious, and I want it to be exciting. So sometimes I don't know how I get from A to B, and that's kind of the exciting part. And sometimes something will pop up in the story and I'll be like, what is that? I don't know. And I leave it in. And then further down the line, my subconscious goes, remember that thing that you planted earlier? This is where it pays off. And I go, special. Oh, great. Okay. Thanks, brain, for reminding me. Sometimes it doesn't work out. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it gets the edits, and my editor goes, what is this? And I'm like, just wait. I don't know. It felt good at the time, so I put it in. And she's like, yeah, it doesn't work. And I take it out. Oh, okay. But you've got to have that joy. You've got to have the joy in the process of actually writing. You've got to love the writing process for sure.
I thought because I was going, I thought being an outliner was taking the fun out of writing. So I tried to pants.
No.
And what I've discovered is I'm more excited about what you said. And that's exactly what was in my mind. You displayed it wonderfully. And in my head, it's like I have to know a good sense of the beginning, the middle, the end. But then I want that wiggle room where I have the freedom to do with what I want, but knowing that these certain things are going to happen. But I'm going to fill those in with that creative moment.
Yeah, you're writing towards something in your mind, because that first book that you write could take 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, and life gets in the way. Stuff happens. You know, you plan something, stuff comes up, you have to delay it. And if you haven't planned anything and you sit down after a month, 6 months to start working on the book again, and you have nothing in place, to be going, I've got 4 hours free for the first time in ages to write, and I've got nothing. I spent 3 hours and 57 minutes scratching my head because I couldn't remember what I was doing. Whereas you got something you're working towards, you go, oh yeah, that's where I was. Okay, I'll write this next little bit.
It's funny, man. I just said that to my wife like 2 days ago. I said, what I find myself doing is writing 5 pages, but then having to reread 5 pages to realize where I was going. When you're on page 400, what are you going to do then? You're just going to, you can't read 400. I mean, I'm sure you could, but boy, that would take a long time. So I think I'm very much in line with what you're saying that you do.
It's good. So if I'm writing, I get to the end of a chapter or I get to the end of a session. When I sit down the next time, I'll look back at the last couple of pages only to kind of get myself back in the rhythm. I tweak those little things, but then I keep moving forward. I don't go back to the beginning, because people get caught in this endless cycle of, I have to make it perfect. I have to make it brilliant. And I'm like, that's how you never get past 20,000, 50,000. Get to the end, however long it takes. Even if you think it's awful, even if you hate it, get to the end, because you can fix it. If you've got 20,000 words, you can't fix anything. That's not a story. That's a bit of a story. There's no, you can't do a jigsaw and look at the whole picture and actually see what you've created until you've put all the pieces in. And then if you hate it, you can then change all the pieces around and rechange the picture. But you can't do it with half a puzzle, man. You've got to finish that first draft.
Thank you, man.
You're welcome. So like Peter Brett, who did the Painted Man or the Warded Man, you know, he had a busy job. He has a partner. He's got kids. He would write on his phone every day on the way to work and on back on the train, like 20 minutes, half an hour on his thumbs, typing into his phone. And then he'd get home, and at night he'd upload it to his computer, tidy it up a bit. And that's all the time he had. Next day, goes to work. He's back on his phone whilst he's thinking. And that's how he wrote the first book over a year or 2 years, bit by bit, 20 minutes at a time. And then
that's inspiring.
Exactly, Mike. You've just got to kind of chip away at that mountain. Every time I start a new book, everyone's like, it must get easier. It does not get easier. It gets harder, because you don't want to repeat yourself. You don't want to be, you want to progress. You want to grow as a writer. You want to test yourself. You want to excite the readers. So it gets more and more difficult. So I appreciate some older authors who are on book 50 and they pull something out the bag. And I'm like, I never saw that coming. I'm amazed. This is fantastic. But
what is something that you do to progress your writing craft?
Constantly read. Constantly.
I was hoping to hear that, because that's what in my head, that's how I get better.
So when I first started writing out, this is 20 plus years ago now, I did fan fiction. I wrote my own versions of stories of TV shows and other things that I loved. And it was very derivative, but it helps you in a way, because say you're writing, I don't know, Star Trek fan fiction, you know the ship, you know the characters, you know the thing. And then you're like, okay, but what if they go to this planet? On this planet, these things happen. Well, that's quite interesting. You don't need to set up 90% of the stuff. It is done for you. You understand the mechanics. You know how it all works. You know the universe, and you have a great bit of fun. It's only later on that you think, okay, if I was doing my own world or my own space show, how would it be different? How would I grow? What don't I like about Star Trek? What do I like? And the other thing is, when I first started writing out, a lot of my characters, people would say, that's a bit like you, that's a bit like your friend so and so. I can see that's a bit like, because you're copying what you know, everything is familiar and you soak it all in. But after a while, like one of the starter questions that people ask writers is, which of your characters is most like you? And the answer is all of them, because I wrote them all, and none of them because they shouldn't be like me anymore. Not now, at this stage. There's pieces, there's little bits, I'm sure, like the humor. My partner should be like, that is your sense of humor. He's being really sarcastic. That's just like you. He's got a really dark sense of humor. That's just like you. And I'm like, yeah, shush. But nobody knows apart from her, man. Like, nobody would get it.
I love that. Not only because that's funny for you and a wonderful thing that somebody personal to you can read and see them or see you through what you write. So that's got to be so cool to hear.
Yeah. But yeah, also constantly read within the genre. I mean, I know some authors, like especially fantasy authors, don't read fantasy because they say it feels too much like work.
Joe Abercrombie said that. Yeah, exactly.
But he's quite a unique guy in that a lot of the inspirations for his books come from outside fantasy, like westerns and crime. And, which I got it to read as well.
My wife won't finish it. She got 10 pages to finish, and she won't finish it because she loves it so freaking much.
It is a doorstepper of a book, man, for me to read. Yeah. I will get to it, but
so I had mentioned it to her. I said, and you are pretty much exactly quoting the interview that I quoted to her. I said, this is one of his favorite, maybe his favorite book, and he has a lot of influence from this. And she started it and just devoured those 800 and some pages.
Yeah, it's got to be like 830 pages. It is immense, huge.
It's big, and like I said, she's like 5 pages from finishing it, and she's like so afraid to finish. She just loves it.
but I love fantasy. I read for pleasure. I can turn off the analytical part of my brain, but for me, reading good fantasy spurs me on to write my own. It doesn't make me want to copy it. It makes me excited about fantasy. So I love Robin Hobb. She's one of my favorite fantasy authors. Her books are nothing like mine. And she's such a gloriously fantastic writer. But if I read one of her books, it energizes me. Then I'm like, I want to get back to my story. And then I sit down and I start working on mine. Whereas other people are like, it feels too much like hard work. And you've got to do what how you feel comfortable. But for me, it's the first kind of book I want to pick up and read, Yeah,
me too. And I'm glad that you touched on that point, because I've heard the same thing. It's like, I write fantasy, so I don't read a lot because I feel like I'm at work. And it's like, I'm glad that my love for reading fantasy started before I knew I wanted to write it, because I pick up that same vibe. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to copy the story in any way, but I like the options that I now have in my repertoire, and this is possible. Sam Paisley, he just released his debut novel, Elements of Time. That is the series name. And he says, hello, fellow beardos. Yes, by the way, I like the patch, brother. He says, logging on late, but glad to be here. He's also an outliner. I appreciate that, Sam. And he would highly recommend John Truby's Anatomy of Story. I'll have to pick that up.
Nice.
Langdon also says, Stephen, glad to hear you explain your writing practice. I have had to learn the hard way to not get boggled down editing and just write.
Oh, yeah. I've done lots of writing courses. I've taught students. I go to universities and give lectures to creative writing students. I did one a few months ago. And one of the questions is, what advice would you give to writers starting out? And it's always the same go-to piece of advice I go to, which is finish the draft. I don't care if you hate it. I don't care how long it takes you. I don't care if you write 20 minutes on a train and that's the only time you've got to write on the way to work. You get it done, because it's always a mountain, and it's to chip away at it. Writing a book is always a marathon as well. Like some people are like, oh, I burned through the first draft in 6 weeks or something. I'm like, if you can do that, that is amazing.
Holy shit.
I am not one of those guys. I cannot do it. It takes me 6, 8, 9, 10 months to do a draft, because I have to fit it in around everything else that's going on. The fastest I ever wrote a book was 6 months, but that's because there was so little else going on during COVID. I could dedicate more time to it. So, and it's you're going to hit a rhythm eventually. It's that thing of, if you block out 4 hours to write, you won't write for 4 hours solid. You just can't. So if you try and start at that level, which is why I always say, write in slices and then build them up. So write for 20 minutes. If you can write solid for 20 minutes, then you take a break, you get a cup of tea, you walk around the block, you play with the kids. Then you sit down at another time during the day and you write for another 20 minutes. And you kind of keep doing that. And if you've got that point where, like, I feel like I could go a bit longer, make it 30 minutes. And eventually you might get to a period where you're like, right, I can write for an hour solid. And then I have to stop because there's other stuff going on in my life. And like, okay, you'll be very productive for that period. But if you jump into 4 hours straight away, you'll be on the internet, you'll be on YouTube, you'll be reading, you'll be playing a game, you're on your phone, you're on social media, you'll be checking your emails, you know, like, how much you've actually done writing in those 4 hours that I gave that gift to you, husband. What have you done those 4 hours? These 10 words. Like, dude, come on.
I love that type of advice because I'm very much that kind of guy. It's like, if I have an hour, I actually did it a little bit before we talked. I was going on there to put some links in our description, and a video caught my eye, and I just forget that I'm even alive right now, right? And I'm like, oh, this is such a cool video on how to make knives. And it's like, yeah, what does that have to do with what you're doing today, man? You know, nothing.
There are more distractions now than ever before. So yeah, if you can kind of cut yourself off from them in any way for a bit of period of time to write, got to do it. Got to do it. Head down and just, like, put the phone away in another room if you need to.
That I will have to do that. Ryan Skeffington is another.
Hey, Ryan.
Indie author, and he popped in a little late, but guess what? That doesn't matter because I appreciate the heck for you being here, man. I'll catch the rest after work. I appreciate it. He's given some wonderful, wonderful tips that I've been writing down like crazy over here. I liked your background when I done my research. Would you tell everybody, like, where you were born and how the move went and everything, like how old you were, kind of a little bit about you?
Yeah, so I was actually born in Iran, and I came to the UK before I was 1. So I basically lived in the UK my entire life. Grew up in the northeast of England, right on the coast by the sea, and I've had like a blessing because I have family from 2 very different worlds. I have access to kind of 2 very different cultures. But it's just always been a part of my life. I grew up reading fantasy. I started with, you know, a lot of people do, like Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. You know, we talked about The Wizard of Oz and Gulliver's Travels and all of these great kind of books. And fantasy was always my first love. And to begin with, I think my parents were a little bit worried because that was the only thing I would read. But after a while, they're like, you know what? He's always reading a book. That's got to be good.
That's really good. Yeah.
So I've always been reading a book since I was like 8. I've never not had a book ever since then. Like, I'm always reading something. I doesn't feel right if I'm not reading a book. So
I love that. What I'm trying to do with my kids, they're still really young, and I always tell this story, but I'm always grabbing The Hobbit because that's the first book I want to read my son.
Yes.
Well, my sons, I have 3 sons, but my oldest son, and he's not 5, not even 5 yet. He's 4. And it's like, my wife's just like, be realistic today. And she has to tell me, like, every week, like, you can't grab it yet. But I'm just really excited. I hope that my sons can say the same thing, that, hey, my dad inspired me to read. Because I think that's important. You know, you grow up with this imagination that will flourish as in a world where it's hard to have that as an adult. And I think that it's something that can be mentally very good for you, creatively, in many ways. So I love that you talked on that.
It is. It's. I think fantasy and fiction in general is very, very good. It's frees the imagination. You're right. We lose some of that kind of fun as we grow up and get more responsibility. And some people look down on fantasy and kind of make fun of it. And it was only in. So here's the story from my childhood. When I was in high school, we'd study Shakespeare because you all do. It's part of the standard thing. We read it. And we're studying it and breaking it down. And after a while, you know, I began to loathe it because the teacher made us study it in such detail And I was like, oh God, this is so boring.
Mhm.
And then the reward at the end of like the semester was we got to watch a production of it on video in the classroom. I was sat at the back of the classroom by the window reading The Elf Stones of Shannara by Terry Brooks.
Nice, Terry Brooks.
And I got caught and then sent to the headmaster's office, and I sat in the corridor reading it. Now, looking back on it, I can kind of, if I had the wisdom that I had now, I would have turned around and said, hang on, you're making fun of my fantasy book, but we just done Macbeth. So tell me about witches. Tell me about ghosts. Tell me about, dude, it's all fantasy, man. But back then I was a little okay, sir. And go to the headmaster's office. But fantasy, people deride it some circles still. But it's mythology. We've been telling stories about heroes and legends and mythology for thousands of years. So fantasy is just, I think it's my favorite and the best genre.
It allows people to do whatever the hell they want to on a piece of paper with their own independent creativity. And I love it too. I love it. And I like this question a lot too, Ryan. He says, I love the phrase, remember how you used to dream. When people ask about how to come up with big ideas. How big did you dream as a child? Have you had, or how much have you tampered your own ability?
I think as a kid, I always wanted to be a writer. I think I told my dad when I was like 8 or 10, and he said, oh, that's great, but you still have to have a day job. And so I did. I have a day job still. I don't think I ever stopped chasing that dream. And I think because I was so persistent and I kept that spark alive for so long that I never gave up, and I wasn't ever going to give up. So it took me a long time to get published. Some people write their first book, they send it out in their 20s and they get published and it's great and they carry on. That was not my story. That was not what happened to me. I wrote a book. It was awful. I was like 21. I sent it out. I got rejected. I wrote the next one. I sent it out. I got rejected. And I did that for like 13 years during my 20s and 30s, book after book, rejection after rejection, just over and over and over again. Because back then, self-publishing isn't what it was now. It wasn't nearly what we have today. But back then, and equally, my quality just wasn't very good. I've looked at some of my trunk novels and I understand why they were rejected. I had to learn to grow up. I had to progress my ability as a writer to get to the level that I'm at now. Just that my agent looked at it and said, this is quite good. There's something there. But, I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready when I first started writing. No way.
But you had those stepping stones. It just came with this natural progression based on your love for what you wanted to do. And I like those stories the best because I watched Joe Abercrombie and it was, my first book. And I believe that was his first book, The Blade Itself. He just, sent it in and got picked up. Wonderful, great, that's awesome. But I think most people can relate highly with what you just said.
Most people have to struggle. Most people have to kind of get to the certain level of quality, of a standard, in order to kind of be traditionally published. With self-publishing now, you can write any kind of story that you want and you can put it out. It may find an audience, it may not, but there's a balance between how much free time do you have versus how much time do you willing to invest as a self-published author versus essentially you pay someone else to do it. Because I never dip my hand in my pocket as a traditionally published author. The money always flows to me. Whereas with the self-publishing author, you're paying for everything, all the edits, the covers, and the whole shebang. But there again, I couldn't afford it then. I didn't have the time to do it then. It was a very different world now. Now, some of the self-published books are completely indecipherable, and you can't tell the difference because the quality is there.
Very much so. That's one of the points that I talk a lot on my channel about. Is I've just read, honestly, most of the indie books I've read are really good. And then some of them are just like, oh my gosh, like whatever publisher told this person no is missing out, so there's lots of quality and variance because like you said, an indie writer can write whatever the hell they want. And they don't have anybody saying, I don't know. You do what you want. So I always like to talk about this company, if it has something to do with the author I'm speaking to, because I love this company. How has been working with the Broken Binding over the years? How has that been?
That's been really, really good. I brought this to show you as well.
Yes.
This is a limited edition, one of 52 copies of the Judas Blossom in a slipcase. There are 52 of these, and that is it. I mean, look at the sprayed edges on these.
That's incredible. And to be an author of that, man.
I mean, talking about, you know, how much you tamper your dreams. My dream was to be traditionally published, to walk into a random bookshop and see my book right up on the shelf next to a whole bunch of authors that I've been reading my entire life. And when you see that, it doesn't get any better. That was just fantastic. So seeing a hardback special of mine from the Broken Binding has been absolutely fantastic. We did the Coward and the Warrior as a special. Now we've done the Judas Blossom, and it's been so good.
I love that.
You know, we'll probably start working on the second book soon, special edition for the Judas Blossom for next year, for July. So there's more to come, and it's this. I love books as artifact. I don't have an e-reader. I understand how useful Kindle is, but I can't use them. And but books as physical artifacts, I love them. And the special editions, you don't get any
nothing better. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I wish it's like, of course, I think anytime you dip in to a hobby that started out as a hobby, but now something that's a passion. At 29, when lots of people have been doing this their whole life, you know, reading and loving books, I wish I was a little earlier, because I wish I could have gotten a hold of a lot of what the Broken Binding has done, such as the Judas Bloom. There's so many special editions I see coming out that, you know, if you're part of the subscription, it just, you pay monthly and you get them. I'm on the list, of course, but I can't wait to be finally on that and get this wonderful treasures like what you just held up. Because as an artifact, they are. They're so special, and they're not ridiculously priced. There are others that have very expensive special editions, and I'm thinking, I can't afford that. That's just way outside of my budget. Like, I bought a very special edition of Dune because it is my favorite science fiction book of all time, from the Folio Society. Have I got it? So beautiful.
I got it here actually. So this is the Folio Society edition. Have you seen this in a slipcase?
I've seen it on Matt on Books.
It is absolutely gorgeous, and it's got, you know, paintings in, and so this cost quite a lot of money, but I used, you know, part of one of my advances to get it. I mean, look at the paintings of, like,
oh my gosh, I know that just because I've watched the movie, I know that character, but I can't wait to read that character.
So, you know, something like that costs a lot of money, but it's my favorite book of all time of sci-fi. I was going to get it. So absolutely. But for some of the other books, I think those are really nice, and I like that series. I'd like to pick it up. So you're talking about Adrian Tchaikovsky, his Shadows of the Apt. We've had like 3 of those come out now, and they're beautiful books, and it's a great series. So I think they're doing a fantastic job. They're giving amazing books more readership. People are discovering them for the first time. And I think the hardbacks are just beautiful things to have on a shelf and look at again and get more people reading. That can only be a good thing, you know?
Absolutely. And I like that you touched on, I didn't as a non-reviewer, but as a reviewer, I did get the old Kindle, just because you can, I'll tell you my wife's story. You know, when she's feeding our newborn, she can't hold open a big book.
Oh, of course. Yeah. You just sat there with a Kindle. You can
yeah. So that comes in handy for her. Now, if I'm like at a doctor's appointment, I'll bring that. But yeah, I feel comfortable if I'm holding 3 or 4 books in my hand. My wife, I'll leave the house, and we both know I'm not gonna be able to read. We got kids that we're gonna be pulling in and out of cars, but it's just like that reassurance that if I need a little escape, I've got it. Question I just seen pop up. Matt from Matt's Fantasy Book Reviews. Stephen, unserious question. Who is taller, you or James Smith? Serious question. What's your favorite Drenai book?
Okay, so this is something that I started. The unserious question first. This is something that I started a few years ago. I noticed there's quite a proliferation of fantasy authors that are quite tall. So you can't see because I'm sat down, but I'm 6'5". And then there's like Ryan Cahill, and then there's Justin Lee Anderson, and then there's Dave Ragg. And so I was like, we should have like a tall fantasy society. And I kind of like, yeah, I did it. And in September just gone, four of us were together. We all got a photo. So there's Dave Ragg at 6'7", There's me at 6'5". There's Ryan Kill at 6'4", and there's little tiny Justin Lee Anderson at 6'3". Except Dave Ragg went and met Empire the Vampire, Jay Kristoff, who's in London the other day. That dude is enormous. He's like 6'8". So he's he's like the king of the club at this point. He's just huge.
So you and I are actually the same height. I have to join that club eventually.
You're in, man. You're in. If you write that first book, you are in. So people are like, well, what's the minimum height for a woman? I'm like, well, it can't be too. I think we said 5'10" for a woman. That's, you know. So we've got a couple of ladies. Tall
for a woman, actually.
Yeah, we've got a couple of ladies in there already. They're all so good. James Smythe, I think he's a little bit taller than me. I think he's like 6'6".
It was funny to hear how tall Ryan Cahill was, because, like, in my head, for some reason, he was a shorter guy.
Yeah, he's pretty big. Yeah. David Green, he's another guy who's very tall. He's like 6'7", 6'8". Wow. I don't know why we're all so big. It's part of, we all have to be tall. We all have to have a cat. Dude, I don't know why. It's part of the thing.
Yeah. Did you play any sports?
I tried playing basketball. When I was growing up, it wasn't really as much of a thing. I played rugby because I was big, and therefore they're like, you're in the scrum. Oh, okay then. I swim. I used to swim. I used to do martial arts, but I think swimming and rugby were probably the best things.
That's awesome.
My height.
I played football and basketball myself, but that would be comparative, not as manly by any means, but rugby is right there with hockey. It's like you're getting teeth knocked out, probably. Like, they're just rough.
You come home with fresh bruises every week.
Sure.
But going back to Matt's other question, my favorite Draenei book. So this is David Gemmell. He's probably my favorite fantasy author of all time, I would say. He's the one who's inspired me the most. He's the one whose work mine is most similar to. My favorite Draenei book, that is tough. Maybe Waylander, which is the fourth book. He wrote them never planning that many books in the world. There's different stories, but now we kind of say the Draenei saga, because there's like 23 books set within the same world, but they don't all follow on. They all kind of things. So either Waylander or one of the earlier Drust books where when he's a younger man, one of those books are really, really good.
Matt actually got me into a couple different, probably a lot of what I'm reading. I love his channel, but recently Shadow of the Apt, the way he talks about it, and he does this kind of thing, like, it's just good. Like, it's just good. And that's like, man, to kind of lose the words for what you're trying to explain and why it's like you just have to feel it. So Matt, if you weren't around, I just started Empire of
Black and Gold.
Black and Gold. I was going to say gold and silver. Black and Gold. Thank you. So loving it so far. And don't feel too bad, Ryan. That's super tall, bro.
That's all right, man. You're in the club. You know, you're 6'2", 6'3". You're kind of on the threshold, but I think we let you in, so you're okay. You're all right.
It is, man.
Amazing.
So it's funny how certain questions that I was going to ask have been answered within other questions. It's very natural conversation. I love it, man. I don't always have those, and I've absolutely loved talking with you. But one that I love to talk about is what are you currently working on? I love this question.
Okay, so book 3 of the trilogy, The Nightingale and the Falcon. So that's going to be handed in at Christmas.
Yes.
Book 2, I'll be editing next year and editing book 3 next year. So I think there's a title, there's a cover for the second book. I can't tell anybody, I can't show anybody yet. It'll all be announced early, probably next year. But yeah, so book 2 will be out in July next year. I don't know when book 3 is out. Given that I've written it, it may come out sooner. In January, I start something completely new. Totally new. New world again, totally different. And it's kind of like cleaning the slate. Just kind of, I've still got to do edits on 2 and 3. And yeah, it's going back into that world. But at the same time, that grass is greener idea that's been bugging me in the back of my brain for like 2 years going, you want to write this story? You really should write this story. It's coming now. It's coming. My time is nearly here. I'm starting it in January.
I love that. That's why I kind of I knew you had kind of touched on what you were working on, but I always get something extra when I ask the question. So I'm super excited, man. I love talking with people that I know I'm going to be reading soon, and that they're going to be continuing this wonderful work that you're doing.
Absolutely. More to
I
come.
I love that, and your fans are going to be so happy to hear that. Fantasy and science fiction, this is from E.L. Montague, are the best ways to comment on the world without wading into the politics to keep people from listening.
Yes, the best science fiction and fantasy for me is like holding up a mirror to the world and telling stories about it without it being really, really obvious. That's what it's all about. Yeah, so as I said, if someone reads The Coward, they get a fun adventure story. If they scratch beneath the surface, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's going on. If they don't, they do have a great time. I'm happy. They had fun reading a book. If they see what's going on underneath, I think so. I've had comments, I've had emails, I've had people contact me and say, have you served in the armed forces? Because the character that's suffering from PTSD, it feels real. It feels like you've been through this. And
That's a compliment.
I've gone back to written back to them and said, I haven't, but thank you. My research has paid off. The work has paid off. You know, so that's a great kind of honor to receive from people. So those kind of things really kind of keep you moving, you know?
That I can imagine, because you want to make this experience for people. And I actually have an author in mind where I asked him, I think it was 2 days ago, it was Nick Horvath. Mm-hmm. And he's written a wonderful debut, thriller noir, just a badass, punchy prose. It's called Sledge versus the Labyrinth. It's wonderful. But throughout this book, you're reading these military technicalities about guns and night vision scopes with numbers and symbols and shit. And you're just like, man, this guy must be in the CIA. He's in the SAS. And it's like, I think as an author, I couldn't imagine feeling better than that moment. Somebody's like, hey, is this real?
Where did you serve? And you're like, I didn't, man.
Yeah. That's so cool, man. I love to hear that. So we've got some stuff that's coming up next. Where can people follow you as far as your social media and buy your books? I know you've got a bunch of places where people can buy your books.
Yeah, sure. The best place to find me. So I'm on YouTube. As you said, I have a YouTube channel. I do writing advice videos. I started to mostly because a lot of the advice out there was kind of, it felt quite skewed against traditional publishing. So I wanted to debunk some of the myths, but also I love talking to other authors. I love talking to other writers and finding about how they got to where they are. So there's like 40 interviews with other authors I've done on there, talking to them about their process.
It's a wonderful channel, guys.
Thanks, man. Like, you know, how they got published, how did they get to where they are, what were they inspired by as a kid? I love all that kind of stuff. I'm on Instagram as well. Twitter's kind of dying a death. I am on there, but I only post kind of updates. I've got a monthly newsletter, so check out my website, check me out on Instagram. That's probably the best place to find me, or YouTube.
Awesome. Okay, I'll have to add. Actually, I think I got them all. So where can people buy your books?
Oh yeah, sure. All the usual places. Amazon, Barnes and Noble. If you go to the Broken Binding, you can get them from there too. They have some of the special editions left of the Judas Blossom.
There's some left.
Yeah, so there's only 52 of these ones, and they're all gone. But they did 1,000 of this other one that's upstairs. That's really good too. And I think there are some of those left. But yeah, that's they're not.
I know what I'm asking for Christmas.
Yeah, support your local bookshop too as well. I know Amazon is huge and powerful and everything, but if you can support your local indie bookshop, please do so. And the Waterstones in the UK as well is a big chain here that needs support. So yeah, all these
wonderful. I'll have all that stuff in the description. If I missed anything prior, I'll have it in shortly after.
Cool.
One of my favorite questions so far that I've kind of actually got from a viewer. Who are a few people you would like to see me interview in the future?
Okay, so I looked ahead and thought about this one. Richard Swan.
Ooh, that's a new one. I have talked with him, but I'll talk with him again. He's
hilarious. He's really funny. We had the best time every time we talk.
He's witty, man.
He's just so funny. I mean, he's in Australia, so when I spoke to him, it was early morning for me, and the first time it was evening for him, and he was just sat there with a glass of wine and getting slightly tipsy as the interview went on. So that was fun. Jonathan French, you should talk to him. So he wrote the Grey Bastard series. So he won one of the SBFBO series. Have you got the books?
got it.
Yes, there you go. So he
I didn't-
self-published the book, but then he won the SPFBO competition. Then he got a traditional contract, and you know, he's a fascinating guy. He does some really clever things in that book. There again, if you read it on the surface, it's a fun adventure and there's half orcs. And then I started like digging at things and poking at things, and he takes fantasy races that you think you know, and he puts a weird twist on them that I've never seen before, and they're brilliant. Like,
That's awesome.
he's really good. Dave Ragg, he's
Ooh.
hilarious. He's one of the club. He's one of the big guys. He's 6'6", 6'7", so he's worth talking to. Andrea Stewart, she wrote the great The Bone Shard Daughter, the trilogy, The Drowned, like it's The Drowned Empire. Someone will tell me.
Those are some wonderful. I usually get like so a lot of people that I've had on, and I've got a few new ones right there.
There you go. There you go. All good. Excited. All fantastic authors.
Would you repeat what Andrea Stewart wrote?
The Bone Shard Daughter is the first one.
Bone Shard Daughter.
Yeah.
I've definitely, I know the cover. I've seen. I just didn't know that she was the author. I'm super excited. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
So, man, I hope this isn't the last time we talk on either one of our channels, because I really enjoyed talking with you. I've gotten so many wonderful actual tips that I'm going to use that are very real things that I can see myself doing. So I just wanted to thank you for letting me borrow you for a little bit. And
you're welcome.
For all you guys that's tuned in live, I appreciate you guys. I would talk for like 2 or 10 more hours with Stephen. I've got to go pick my son up from babysitters. But man, I've had a wonderful time. And for anybody that watches in the future, and then of course, like, subscribe, share, all that fun stuff that comes with having a YouTube page. Go check Stephen's page out if you like authors, if you like talking writing, anything that revolves the process of writing. It's my go-to one. So yeah, I appreciate you guys, and I hope you have a wonderful morning, evening, afternoon, wherever it is you're at, and we'll see you next time.
See you later, guys.